on today's Banzai Beats. Welcome back, everyone, to another segment of Banzai Beats. I'm your host, Ryan, and this is a smaller podcast in between our bigger talks over on Banzai Chat. This is where I like to check out the music side of video games and other pop culture. And today, we are going to be covering one of the greatest Final Fantasy songs of all time. Now, you might be guessing, is it Man with Machine Gun? No. Maybe it's One Wing Angel? No. Hell no. Or maybe it's that song from Final Fantasy X, Otherworld, that for some reason everyone thought Disturbed did it? Nope. Today, we will be talking about the masterpiece that is the Chocobo theme. Now, if you're asking yourself, what is a Chocobo? Well, my friend, you're in for one hell of a treat. While there are many amazing beasts in the Final Fantasy universe, the Chocobo is what I would say the main mascot of Final Fantasy. In its most basic form, it is a large yellow ostrich-type bird in the Final Fantasy world that helps the heroes ride around to get places faster and with ease. But the Chocobo is way more than that, starting all the way back from its first appearance in 1988 with Final Fantasy II and spanning to basically every Final Fantasy game from then on. To even becoming such a fan favorite, it's getting its own games and titles, from racing, dungeon crawling, to even its own Tamagotchi thing, which I wish I had. The Chocobo isn't just one thing either, crossing many different breeds of Chocobo from every color under the rainbow, to its actual look from being more realistic looking to its more cheeky cartoony look. Even fat Chocobo is a thing. And there's no fat shaming here. You keep eating till your heart's content, fat Chocobo. We love ya. The Chocobo phenomenon doesn't stop there either, because the iconic character such as the Chocobo cannot be without its own theme song. Final Fantasy is not without its music, from tons of amazing tracks to being the gold standard for gaming music. The Chocobo theme is no different. It may not be on the scale as other Final Fantasy music, but it does have probably the most charm, I would say. Composed by the great Nobuo Uematsu, it's a catchy theme song that speaks to what the Chocobo is. And when you hear it, you know you're in good hands. Or feathers. Another reason this song is so great is being in all the Final Fantasies, this is just a supporting character's track. They could have probably just stuck with one track and never really touched it again. Not this one. The Chocobo theme would go on to be in each game given its own style and sound, from experimenting to new music types and tones for each of the Final Fantasy game. There are tons of different versions to this one song, like this. But for the sake of this not having to be a longer pod than it should be, I'll be picking a few of my favorites to shed some light on. Starting with the OG itself, from Final Fantasy II, its first appearance, because simply, without this, there would be no theme to talk about. Next, we have Techno D Chocobo from Final Fantasy VI. This was my first Final Fantasy game, so to me, this will always be my first Chocobo theme. To probably one of my top favorites, from Final Fantasy VII, Electric D Chocobo. Just a fun song for the yellow feathered beast. Another honorable mention that just recently came up, I have to say, Wild D Chocobo from Final Fantasy VII Remake is a great jam for a classic theme. Final Fantasy has some of the best music in the history of games, without a doubt. This theme might go under most people's radar, which is why I wanted to cover it on today's podcast. So here's to the theme to our feathery friends that carried us through so many of our favorite Final Fantasy adventures. And that's it for today's Banzai Beats. Thanks again for checking out the podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow on all of our social media at BanzaiChat. Please check out our website, banzaichat.com, where you can find every way to support the podcast. I've been your host, Ryan, and I'll see you all next time.